What's interesting here here on out is I feel like there's a lot of optimism about the other three NFC East teams. I don't know if there should be, but I feel like there is. So it'll be interesting to see where you go here as who's going to finish third.
I really struggled with this, honestly. I've been looking at one of the things I've been looking at, and I told myself when I was approaching this division, is I want known commodities out of this group. I want to feel confident in at least something out of this team if I pick them to win the division. And all of these teams have a little bit of a known commodity to it, I feel like. At the end of the day, I am going to go with the Dallas Cowboys third.
Okay.
Here's the thing. So the offensive line, the top five guys, I still think are pretty good when healthy, but they didn't do anything really, I felt like, to address the depth enough. And while I think the defense will be better kind of by default because it was so bad, I'm not sure if it's going to be good enough to make up for their deficiencies last year. And was that offense awesome to begin the season? Yeah, sure, it was pretty good. But at the same time, you look at a lot of those games, their offense was kind of awesome because they were playing a lot of garbage times and pulled a couple games out at the end. They were throwing – Dak Prescott at one point was on pace to set the NFL yard passing record through those first 4 games. But it was because they were down in so many games, he was just throwing the ball so much. But, I think he's a terrific quarterback. I think that this offense can be good. But there's too many things I don't know about this team that I don't feel confident in picking it to win the division, whereas I like things about the other teams more. So I'm going with the Cowboys at third.
Okay, so you got some mixed reactions in the chat. Someone says third, you love to see it. Another person says dude on the right is a fraud. So you have, it seems like all over the spectrum a little bit, and that's the way I expect for the next, all three of these teams. I think there's legitimately hope, like Super Bowl aspirations for all three of these teams. Which again, not saying that's smart, but that's the fan bases. There is hope here, and it is the annual Dallas Cowboys are going to win the Super Bowl preseason hype, which seems to happen every year. It's not the first thing I have to say is this team has Mike McCarthy. So let's pump the brakes a little bit. Mike McCarthy, second worst coach in the NFL according to our rankings. Dak Prescott ends up finishing 9th, so that's tier 2. But kind of a very yin and yang of I love the quarterback, head coach not so much.
Yeah, I think my affinity for Dak Prescott has been well documented on this team,
yes,
on this podcast, So, I'm a big fan of Dak Prescott. I also have him tier 2. I don't think there's a scenario where he's tier 1. But, that's the thing. I think he's terrific, but are the players around him good enough to also be at his level? And I don't necessarily feel that. And, I think that's the argument for Dallas and Dallas going into this season is, hey, we had the best quarterback in this division. And to a degree, I agree. They definitely have the best quarterback in this division. There's no question about it. But I just think there's too many holes other places that I don't like. So, I think it's a terrific option, but the other options around him aren't as great.
Yeah, exactly. I'm completely good stuff. And we'll get into the rest of the offense now. The offense is good. There's a lot to like here. The halfback room I have is a tier 3. Ezekiel Elliott, I do feel like is not what he wants. He's more about name brand than he is about, what he's actually bringing to the table now. Maybe it's injuries. Maybe he'll have a bounce back season. As we all know, running backs typically after they, start to slow down, they typically then have bounce back years. That's usually what happens. And then you have Tony Pollard, who is maybe even the better halfback out of the two. It's tier 3. It's not awful. Again, the Elliott contract, we won't have to get into. That's not the best, but there's value in Elliott and there's value in Tony Pollard.
I think the biggest thing with the Cowboys in this offense, because when people want to put this team in elite category, I just disagree. Because, this is just a bad – I don't think Ezekiel Elliott's a very good running back anymore. It's just so simple. Like you said, after getting bad, running backs don't all of a sudden refine it and get better. I think the best case scenario is the offensive coordinator in Dallas is going to have to be confident with playing Tony Pollard. I think that's the best case scenario for this offense. If Tony Pollard is getting the carries, and at that point, I think the best case scenario for Elliott at this point is he has a little bit of Todd Gurley like last year, where he's just getting these touchdowns and is this red zone machine. But then Tony Pollard's doing the bulk of the work in this scenario. So I think that's the best case scenario for this Dallas running back room and can make it pretty good. But I don't see Elliott getting better. I see him dropping off significantly more compared to last season.
Yeah, I mean that's just again history tells us that's the way it typically goes. I mean I know like Adrian Peterson has kind of broken that, but again he's the exception, not the rule. The good thing about the Cowboys, and maybe the best thing about the Cowboys, is their wide receiving room. This is legitimately great. You do have Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb, all guys who have played like number one receivers. You can argue they're not the top five receivers, but they're all probably top 30 receivers maybe in the NFL. If not, they're close. And they drafted Simi Fako. Sorry for mispronouncing that, Simi. But it was funny. I believe I forget what I remember. Just I happened to watch the game. I forget why, but I was watching the game, scouting something else, and he just like stood out. I'm like, is this guy going to go first round or something? Turns out he was kind of a 1 game wonder, and that was just one game he played really well. But fifth round pick for kind of a flyer. Why not? You got Blake Jarwin, who's a solid all around tight end, but was hurt last year. Dalton Schultz, another solid all around tight end. I have this as a tier one wide receiving room, and it really comes down to three really good options with Cooper, Gallup, and Lamb.
Three really good options, two solid tight end options, and then I mean, I even like Cedric Wilson. He only had 17 catches last season, but he looked like
Okay.
another guy who was pretty good too. So, I mean, I okay, you ready for my take? Because I mean, I was on
Yes.
this guy last year, so my take is CeeDee Lamb's going to be in a lot of top 10 discussions by the end of the season.
Okay.
I think that he has that sort of season. I see him leading this team and receiving this next year, having plenty of touchdowns. But yeah, I think he's going to be in the conversation for a top 10 receiver in this league. We love to anoint young wide receivers too early. Hello, DK Metcalf. And I think CeeDee Lamb's going to get that. I think he's going to have that sort of season where he's going to be in that conversation. This guy's always open. He's always wide open. I don't know how
Mm-hmm.
he does it. He's just so good at just finding these seams and getting wide open. And, he has pretty good hands to match it too. So I think
Yeah.
he ends up in the top 10 discussion at the end of the year.
Interesting. I could definitely see him having a good season. I could definitely see this being a DK Metcalf type year where we see him go from a good rookie to just a really good player. And especially with this team, which we talked about, chance they could be down in games, chance they could have to throw the ball a lot. So having, that could help him get more yards. And, there's always if you have good weapons around you, do you get more yards or do you get less yards? Because could they spread it around more? So maybe you get less yards, but then again, less double teams and stuff. So it's interesting. Yeah. And again, Amari Cooper's hot and cold, but now you can kind of have him have the hot games. And when he's cold, now you have Gallup and Lamb. So it kind of works out well. This is, I think, a clear bright spot in this team.
Yeah, I mean, easy. And it's, as far as tier one wide receiver, I completely agree. It may not have the top end player. It doesn't have the AJ Brown, Julio Jones combination, but it's got five guys you can consistently rely upon. Plus, maybe if a couple guys work out, you're looking at 6 or 7 guys deep between receivers and tight ends that are great.
Yeah, exactly. And the offensive line is another interesting one where there's some injury issues here, but it's also like a great one when healthy kind of thing because you have Tyron Smith and Leo Collins who both were hurt last year, but again are both awesome. And this is if they stay healthy, it's one of the best tackle groups in football, but that is an if. Especially with Smith, I feel a little bit better about Collins. And then Zach Martin, he played tackle last year and was good at it. So, I believe Pro Football Focus had him graded as like the second best tackle, even though he's typically a guard. So he's a monster. He's great. We all know what he can do. Connor Williams, another really good guard. And then the weak spot, other than the injury issues, is Tyler Badaz. Bad is the center for them. That's kind of the one weak spot. But as a whole, this is a good offensive line. There's some issues. I can't put it in tier one because of those issues. I'm going to have it as a tier two offensive line because, again, if it stays healthy, well, then maybe Ezekiel Elliott will look a lot better than he is because you have wide open running lanes and things of that nature.
Yeah, not finding a replacement for Travis Frederick has been a problem for this team. It was a problem last season, and like you said, the issues with this offensive line is I like the guys at starting. I don't like the guys behind it. I think that some of these offensive line groups that we've seen above it have guys that are at least respectable at behind it. I know offensive line depth isn't really much of a thing in the NFL. You're kind of just relying a lot on your top 5 guys. But at the same time, like we've seen teams like the Patriots, we've seen teams like the Browns last season, and even the Buccaneers at points too. deal with injuries on the offensive line and still have respectable options behind it. I'm just not sure that's here on this team, and that's the biggest problem. I'm a huge fan of Lyle Collins. I think he's one of the best tackles in the league when he plays, and I think he's going to be healthy this season. But this is another group where, kind of like what I was saying with the Eagles, these guys also aren't really getting any younger too. So, it's going to be interesting to see how they adjust. Both Tyron Smith and Zach Martin are now 30 years old. So it'll be interesting to see how they can hold up.
Yeah. Also, apologies. I just realized I did not put the banner up on the screen. So if anyone, we're talking about the Cowboys, that's what's happening. Yeah. So for Dallas, I have them as the sixth best offense in football. Their defense, that's where it gets a little bit more tough. And again, the coverage unit there's some questions here to say the least. Trayvon Diggs, who I thought showed flashes. I've made a film study. I haven't posted it yet, but I made one on him. So there's some flashes here. I think that there's some things he needs to improve on, but part of it I do think was coaching with him. So I think he could be a little bit better. And then they drafted, a couple guys, Kelvin Joseph, Nashawn Wright in the second and third rounds to hopefully help fill out that cornerback room. But as we've talked about, rookie corners, that typically, not always, but typically will take you at least a year to really get it down. Safeties, Donovan Wilson, and I guess Keanu Neal. I would assume there's been some talk about him going to linebacker, but I can't imagine he would, given how much linebackers they have now with Jalen Smith, Leighton Vander Esch, and they drafted Micah Parsons. This coverage unit I have as a tier 5 coverage unit. I can't not do that. There's young guys in the secondary, and maybe it was coaching, but how many times were they playing cover 3 and just no one knew who the guy to pick up was? There's like, again, the Seattle game, there were multiple instances of they're playing quarters coverage and a receiver just gets completely deep and no one picks him up and he's wide open in the back of the end zone for a touchdown. These kind of things, I want to blame coaching to some degree. You also have to blame the players to some degree. And I don't know if it's that much talent, even if the coaching is there. So this is tier 5 for me.
Yeah, I think the coaching has some to blame, but at the same time, just from the games I watched, this wasn't like they were doing some in-depth coverage stuff. This wasn't really deeply complicated. Like you said, the Seattle game, it was quarters coverage.
Right.
These guys have run quarters coverage probably since high school, and they weren't able to figure some of it out. I do like Diggs. I'm with you with that. I think the problem with Diggs last year were the lows were really low, and sometimes he looked just really bad on plays, but he also made some really nice plays. So I'll give him credit for those, and I think it's going to get better, and he'll find the consistency. But yeah, the group around him isn't helping him by any means. So I think it's going to be a tough situation. Keanu Neal's a nice piece. It's an interesting piece. Can Keanu Neal stay on the field is the question. Last season he was obviously pretty good, but the season before that he played a total of 4 games in 2 years. So hopefully he can stay on the field. I think that could be a big thing for this Cowboys defense. But how much is Keanu Neal going to help this coverage unit is the question.
And hopefully Keanu Neal, doesn't take other people on the Cowboys off the field. He's one of the kings of the, accidentally hitting his own player and injuring them.
Yeah. And, I think his run ability from safety is a lot better than his coverage ability, in my opinion. So, that's not really, I think, overall helping the coverage of this Cowboys team.
Right.
So I think it's a tough situation.
Yeah, going over to run defense and pass rush, the linebackers is probably the best part of this defense with Jalen Smith, who again, Jalen Smith, that's another example of he's someone who I've seen cover well. He didn't do it last year, but I've seen that. So that's part of why I say okay, I think some of this at least is coaching. Vander Esch is much more of a run defender, and then Micah Parsons, I think, is kind of more of that Swiss Army knife type guy who's going to just blow stuff up. For the rest of their defensive line, though, you have Carlos Watkins and Neville Gallimore in the interior defensive line. DeMarcus Lawrence is clearly the bright spot of this defensive line, but that's kind of all they have. Or, there's, I shouldn't say that. There's Randy Gregory, who, he barely played in 2020. But as a whole, I'm not too high on this. Largely the interior defensive line is kind of the biggest issue. They do have some talent here, but I have this as tier 4 for both run def and pass rush.
Yeah, and they lost Aldon Smith too, who had good production for them as well. So that's a tough situation. And the linebackers, like you said, are the bright spot of this team. But the linebackers have to play better than they did last year too. So we keep saying, "Oh, this offensive line it's a bright spot for this team." their offensive line, I know it was injured, wasn't very good last season. The
Mhm.
linebackers weren't very good last season. So can these bright spots play better than they did last year? Or is it a problem with not just coaching, but them as well? And that's the biggest question. And, I've said this a couple times, it seems like, on this podcast already. Van Der Esch has to stay on the field. I
Yeah.
mean, the last 2 seasons, he's played 10 and 9 games. They need him on the field. I like Jabril Cox also as some depth,
Yeah,
but
sure.
they
Mhm.
they need Van Der Esch on the field, I think, overall.
Yeah. So, and, Greg Zerline, tier 3 kicker. I agree with everything you just said. Not a lot here on this defense. I mean, it really isn't. And this is they're, this kind of Dallas Cowboys team, they're probably the most fun team, right? The team that has great offense and horrible defense that always typically will lead to they should be good for like one or two, like, 38-35 games next year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think they're going to have some exciting games. I think they'll have some competitive games. And there are going to be some games I think that they're going to play some good teams and look impressive. Uh, the question is, I also feel like they're going to play some bad teams and just look flat out bad. This is a team that I think has a high degree of variability. And that's just why, like I said, when it comes to this division, that I think the top 3 teams are so tight and kind of, respectfully, I think it's kind of mediocrity that those 3 teams are so tight. But when it comes to those 3 teams being so close, I just have no idea about some of these guys. Like, people are just assuming that the offensive line, linebackers, Ezekiel Elliott, Randy Gregory, all of these guys,
Mhm.
they just assume all of this is just going to be okay all of a sudden. Like, is it? Are we just assuming all of this is going to be okay? Are you betting on Randy Gregory to play 16 games this season? Like, I just don't see it.
Yeah. And, what's funny about the Cowboys is, what is the meme with them, right? They always go 8-8. Well, now you can't go 8-8 because there's an extra game. But my ranking system, which does take in 17 games, I have them winning 8.51 games. So almost exactly at 500.
Yeah, and I mean that feels fitting, but I mean 500 would have won the division last year, so it'll be
Yep.
close. But at the same time, like, I don't know, I don't see it with this team. They're pretty high favorites to win this division once again. I know Vegas odds with Cowboys are really hard to kind of gauge
Yeah.
because a lot of it is just it's the
Hmm.
Cowboys. But
Right.
I mean, I see it with some of these things, but I just think it's too many unknowns with this team, like I said, which is why I have them at number 3. So you ready to move on to number 2?
Just to wrap a bow on the Cowboys, so that puts them at 18th in the NFL. I have them as ninth in the NFC, so I do kind of have them as a team that could contend for the playoffs. And I don't have them in the playoffs, but I have them, only a couple spots away. And again, the McCarthy's losing 3/4 of a win just by himself. So if one of these rookie corners steps up and maybe McCarthy can just be competent, that could change things for them. I do have them actually as second in this division.